I never thought I'd be standing in this attic, my mother's old diary in my hands, reading words that would change everything I thought I knew about her and about my family. My name is Isabelle Andrews, and I'm 31 years old. After years of living in a fog of uncertainty, I finally found the courage to start cleaning out the attic of my childhood home. My father had moved to Florida with my stepmother, Teresa, and left me with the responsibility of preparing the house for sale. Little did I know, what I would discover would shatter everything I thought I knew about my mother's death. I was just getting started, lifting up boxes filled with old photographs, documents, and trinkets, when the leather-bound diary fell from between two boxes. It was old and worn, the edges of the cover frayed from years of handling. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mother's elegant, flowing script was unmistakable. Her words had filled my birthday cards, lunch notes, and even marked the height chart on the kitchen wall for years. And yet, I hadn't thought to question her death, hadn't thought to doubt the story I was told. My fingers trembled as I opened the diary to the first entry I found. Something isn't right. I saw Teresa with Victor again today at the cafe. They didn't see me. She passed him documents under the table, papers with our family letterhead. The words hit me like a slap across the face. For a moment, I just sat there stunned. My hands went cold, and I felt the blood rush from my face. All those years, 17 years without even a second thought. I had simply accepted that my mother's death was natural, that she had suffered from a heart condition, that it had been her time. But now, reading her words, everything was being questioned. Well, she's not who she seems, my mother had written in another entry. When James isn't looking, I've seen her true face, the way she watches him, calculating. The way she measures the house, suggesting updates that would erase every trace of me. I froze, my breath catching in my chest. All those years with Teresa in our lives, years of her perfect smile, her fake concern for me and my father. And yet, in the back of my mind, I'd always felt something was off. But how could I have been so blind? How could I have never questioned her, never thought to see through the facade? My mind raced as I flipped through the diary, the entries growing more frantic. My mother had documented everything. Meetings she had observed between Teresa and Victor, phone calls she overheard, documents she had glimpsed. I was seeing my mother in a way I never had before. Intelligent, observant, determined. She had known something I didn't, and now, after all these years, I was finally learning the truth. The last entries of the diary were the most urgent. I found proof today, documents in Victor's office. He's been working with Teresa for months before he even introduced her to James. They're planning something. I need to tell James. I'll show him the evidence tomorrow. The last entry was written just a day before she died. The cause of death was heart failure, they said. Natural causes, they claimed. And I had believed it all. But now, as I read the words, it felt as though the ground beneath me was crumbling. I closed the diary, my hands shaking. I had spent the past 17 years believing everything had been above board. I never suspected that Teresa had been pulling the strings behind the scenes, manipulating my father, and possibly even plotting to take everything from us. But now I had proof. My mother had known. She had seen the truth before it was too late, and she had tried to warn us. I stared at my phone. Teresa had texted me only hours ago. "Darling, how's the attic cleaning going? Don't bother with the old papers. Just toss everything." I could hear the sweetness in her voice, but there was no mistaking the coldness beneath it. She had no idea I had found the diary. She didn't know I was onto her. I typed a simple response, my fingers typing faster than I could think. "Saw your note. Thanks for the heads up." I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure what to do next. But then something within me shifted. My mother had fought to protect our family, and now it was my turn to do the same. The following days felt like a blur. I spent every spare moment reading through my mother's diary, tracing her growing suspicions. Each entry was like a piece of a puzzle I had been too naive to see. But the truth was slowly emerging, and I felt an urgency I couldn't shake. I needed to do something about it. I couldn't trust Victor. He had been my family's lawyer for years, but now I saw how he had been working hand in hand with Teresa. I had to find someone else, someone who could help me unravel this web of deception. I remembered Sarah Chen, my law school friend who specialized in estate litigation. She had always been sharp, and I knew she would be able to help me understand the legal documents my mother had referenced. We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, far from my usual haunts, where there was no chance of running into anyone who might be working for Teresa. I brought the diary along with copies of every document I could find, including the estate papers I had been given by my father's lawyer years ago. Sarah flipped through the papers, her expression darkening as she read through the trust modifications. "These aren't just updates," Sarah said slowly, her voice low. "This is a complete restructuring of ownership control. Look at this clause. It essentially gives Teresa veto power over any major business decisions once your father turns 65. I froze. He turns 65 next month. "And look here," Sarah continued, pointing to another part of the document. "The succession planning puts any future children of Teresa ahead of you in terms of inheritance rights. Has she mentioned wanting children?" My stomach dropped. I thought back to Teresa's recent comments, her sudden interest in family planning. "She's been talking about IVF. She thinks my dad isn't too old to have more children." Sarah's expression darkened. "If she has children with your father, she would have permanent control over everything. The company, the properties, the family trust. You'd be disinherited." My heart raced as the pieces began to fit together. Teresa wasn't just trying to secure her place as my father's wife. She was working to take everything from me, and my mother had known it all along. My mother had tried to warn me, but I hadn't been ready to hear it. "She's been planning this for years," I muttered, staring at the papers in front of me. "She's been manipulating my father, isolating him from his friends, pushing him to transfer assets. She's been in control this whole time." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "We need to move carefully. These people, Teresa and Victor, have orchestrated a sophisticated long-term fraud. Your mother was about to expose them. She was going to confront Victor the day she died." I sat back, my mind spinning. My mother's final fight had been against Teresa, but now it was my turn to finish what she had started. The next few days were a blur of research and preparation. Sarah had given me a clear plan: gather the evidence, trace the money, and expose Teresa's lies before she could bury us under her control. But it wasn't going to be easy. Teresa had already positioned herself as the doting wife, the perfect stepmother. She was too clever, too careful, and she had my father wrapped around her finger. But Sarah and I weren't just going to sit back and let her win. I felt a mixture of fear and determination coursing through me as I spent long hours in my office. My mind kept replaying the entries from my mother's diary, the frantic tone, the final plea to stop Teresa before it was too late. I couldn't shake the image of my mother sitting at that table, writing those last words as she fought to expose the truth. And I couldn't help but feel as though it was my responsibility now to finish what she started. The first breakthrough came when I was digging through my mother's old papers. I found the name of a private investigator, someone she had hired to follow Teresa and Victor's activities long before I ever knew anything was wrong. His name was Robert Taylor. I wasn't sure how my mother had managed to keep this information hidden, but I was grateful that she had. I contacted Robert, and after a tense conversation, I learned that he had gathered significant evidence on Teresa's past. She wasn't the widow she had claimed to be. In fact, Teresa's late husband, Richard Conway, was alive and living in Arizona. He wasn't dead in a car accident, as she'd told everyone, including my father. This discovery was a game changer. I had no idea how Teresa had managed to pull this off, but I was starting to understand the depth of her deception. I knew I couldn't confront her directly yet. Not until I had everything I needed. Sarah had warned me that people who orchestrate complex frauds like this one could be dangerous, especially when they were cornered. So I kept everything under wraps, pretending to be the dutiful daughter cleaning out the attic. But every day I felt closer to the truth, closer to uncovering the full extent of Teresa's manipulations. Then came the day I had been both dreading and preparing for. I had arranged to meet Teresa at a local cafe, a place where my mother had once seen her with Victor. It was the perfect setting, public, neutral ground, with plenty of witnesses. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I was ready. Ready to expose her, ready to confront her with everything I had discovered. When she arrived, she wore the same perfect smile, the same carefully crafted look of concern. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of nervousness that hadn't been there before. She greeted me with exaggerated warmth. "Isabelle, darling," she said, settling into her seat. How are you? I was so worried when I didn't hear from you yesterday. I've been busy, I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though my heart was pounding. Going through some of Mom's old papers. Don't spend too much time in that dusty old attic, Isabelle, Teresa said with a nervous laugh. It's not healthy to dwell on the past. You should focus on the future. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. That's funny, Teresa, because it's the past that's going to bring down your whole little empire. I slid the diary across the table, the worn leather cover of it unmistakable. This is my mother's final diary. You remember her, don't you? Or should I say, Teresa Blackwood? Her eyes narrowed in an instant. The warmth in her smile disappeared, replaced by something much colder. For a moment, I thought I saw fear flash across her face, but she quickly masked it with an arrogant smirk. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice tight. But Isabelle, these conspiracy theories you're entertaining, they're concerning, just like your mother before you. I didn't flinch. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. You can deny it all you want, but you can't escape the truth. My mother knew what you were up to, Teresa. She was about to confront Victor before she died. She found everything you were hiding. The air between us thickened, and Teresa's facade began to crack. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her coffee cup. You don't know anything, she spat, her voice low and venomous. Your mother was paranoid. She saw things that weren't there. She was going to ruin everything. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. No, Teresa, she wasn't paranoid. She was right. She knew exactly who you were. And now, so do I. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I know about your fake husband, Richard Conway. I know about your past. And I know what you've done to my family. She went pale, but her eyes didn't falter. Those are lies. Everything you think you know is wrong. Is it? I replied, unfazed. Because I've got proof. Your real name is Teresa Blackwood. You've been running the same scam for years, taking money from widowers like my father and leaving them ruined. I pulled out the private investigator's report, slapping it onto the table in front of her. You think you've been playing a long game, but you've just met someone who's been preparing for this fight a lot longer than you. Her eyes darted around the cafe, looking for an escape, but she couldn't run. The FBI agents sitting a few tables over had already heard everything, and they were closing in. Before Teresa could say another word, the agents were on their feet, walking toward our table. Teresa Blackwood, one of them said, showing his badge. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and involvement in the death of Catherine Andrews. I watched as she was handcuffed, her face twisting into an expression of rage and disbelief. But it was over. The truth had finally come out. In the days that followed, Sarah and I worked tirelessly. We scoured every corner of the house, searching for additional evidence of Teresa's misconduct. Each new discovery felt like a deep wound, but I knew I couldn't stop. My mother had fought alone, and now I had to continue that fight for her. After weeks of investigation, we had gathered enough evidence to expose Teresa and Victor. One beautiful morning, as Teresa enjoyed coffee at a familiar cafe, FBI agents swooped in to arrest her. I sat at a nearby table observing everything unfold. My emotions were mixed: anger, pain, but also a sense of relief. Following Teresa's arrest, I had a long conversation with my father. He admitted his mistake in not listening to my mother and allowing Teresa's deceit. He apologized for making me endure so much suffering. Though I forgave him, the wound in my heart remained unhealed. In the ensuing days, I spent more time with family and friends. I engaged in community activities, helping those in need. I also began writing a book about my journey to uncover the truth, hoping my story would aid others. My story stands as proof that one should never give up on seeking the truth, even when it's painful and challenging. It also serves as a reminder of the importance of family and trust. We must not let wrongdoers exploit our trust to carry out their dark schemes. I want to hear your story. Have you ever faced similar challenges? Please share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. After all the truth was revealed, I felt like I had just won a long battle. Teresa was arrested, and Victor, along with her, had to face charges related to financial fraud and the death of my mother. Both of them confessed, unable to escape the undeniable evidence. But what I found throughout this investigation was not just about revenge. My mother had done something I never imagined. Her death was not just a loss. It was a sacrifice. My mother did not give up, even in the final days of her life, when everyone turned their backs, when her words were considered paranoid. She had seen the truth in all the confusion I couldn't see, and she left me clues, documents, so I could stand up and protect our family. The day I faced Teresa one last time in that cafe, I wasn't just confronting a greedy and cunning woman. I was confronting a part of myself with the strength and determination my mother had passed on to me. I did what my mother couldn't do, and I finished the fight she started. And I no longer felt anger or hatred. I felt peace. After everything was over, I no longer had to face nightmares about my mother's death. The painful memories gradually gave way to new dreams, dreams of her in the flower garden, where she still smiled at me, proud of what I had become. My mother always said, "The truth will set you free." And now, looking back, I understand more than ever. The truth didn't just help me bring justice to my family, but also to all the families that Teresa had destroyed. My mother had not only protected me with advice and love, she had protected me with wisdom and resilience, so I could continue life and do what needed to be done. The sorrowful and uncertain days are over. The house I had been preparing to sell now became the place where I found myself again. A space full of memories, but also the place where I continued my mother's life, carrying on her legacy and not letting the lies cloud my path. A month later, when the trial ended, I stood in the courtroom watching Teresa and Victor being escorted out. I had prepared a victim impact statement, not just for my family, but for all those who had been victims of scams like this. "You didn't just try to take our family's assets," I said, my voice steady. "You stole 17 years of truth from me. The years I spent doubting my mother, believing she had lost her mind. But she was the only one who saw you clearly." Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a relief I had never known before. My mother had finished her part. Now it was time for me to carry on. Months later, I stood in the garden where my mother had spent her life tending to it. The flowers she had planted were now blooming, and I could feel her presence. My mother had not only protected our family, but she had also helped me see the strength within myself. A peaceful feeling flooded through me, as though she were smiling at me from afar, proud of what I had done. Now, I not only inherited the material assets my mother left behind, but also her spiritual legacy. I continued my work, upholding family values and doing the right thing. I knew my mother would always live within me in every decision, in every step I took. Boom. After the trial ended and all the secrets were exposed, I returned home, the place my mother had spent her life loving and caring for. I sat in the garden where the flowers bloomed, where I used to play when I was little. A sense of peace enveloped me, as if my mother were here, watching me and smiling. I could feel her presence in every petal, in every gentle breeze blowing through. I was certain that I had protected my family, but what gave me the most peace was that I had finished what my mother had started. I had found my own strength, thanks to the spiritual legacy she left me, but I kept thinking about the things my mother would have wanted me to continue. A few weeks later, I received a call from my father. He had decided to come back and live near me, temporarily moving into a small apartment after the investigation had concluded. My father had changed so much since we began uncovering the truth about Teresa. He was no longer the man I had once known, controlled by Teresa. He had opened his heart, was willing to face his mistakes, and seemed to be looking for a way to make up for everything he had lost. One evening, as we sat together for dinner, my father suddenly spoke. His voice seemed choked when he said, "Isabelle, I know your mother always wanted you to do something meaningful, not just for our family, but for others too. I want you to continue the work your mother started. You'll keep the house, right? This is the place your mother poured all her love and effort into. I think you'll do it justice." He continued, "Your mother did everything for our family, for you, and now I want you to continue her legacy. You're old enough now, Isabelle. You can do something bigger with what your mother left behind, instead of just keeping it for yourself." His voice was deep and full of emotion. I looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions. I had once thought I would sell the house, but now I understood that this was not just a material asset. It was a legacy, a place filled with memories of everything my mother had given. I nodded, feeling like I was reclaiming a great legacy my mother had left behind. "I'll keep the house, Dad," I said, my voice firmer than ever. "I'll turn it into a place my mother always dreamed of. It won't just be a house, but a center to help families affected by scams, like we were. I'll use this property to help people like my mother, so they won't have to suffer what we went through. My father looked at me with eyes full of pride. He didn't say anything, just held my hand, and I felt the warmth of love between us. We. In the months that followed, I started building a charity foundation in my mother's name. I spent a lot of time organizing programs to help families affected by estate fraud, especially those taken advantage of by ruthless people like Teresa. Like my mother, I couldn't stay silent in the face of injustice. I continued her journey, not just with the inheritance she left me, but with a greater purpose. And now, every time I sat in my mother's old office, the place where I first started uncovering the clues, I felt her presence beside me, watching over me. The paintings, the things she loved, were all back on the walls, as if she would never be forgotten. My mother didn't just protect me with her heart, but she also taught me how to stand up for myself. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would certainly be new challenges, but I was ready to face them because I no longer feared. I had a strong legacy, a loving family, and a clear purpose. And above all, I had the courage my mother had passed down to me. If you've enjoyed this journey through Isabel's story and the incredible strength her mother passed on to her, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of the story resonated most with you? Have you ever experienced something similar? Or do you have your own stories of family, courage, and uncovering the truth? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We're excited to hear from you.